They told us aging was about decline. But what if the real loss was that we believed them? Stay with me. This might change how you see the rest of your life. You were taught this lie before you even had words for it. You saw it in commercials, heard it in jokes, felt it in the way people talked about birthdays, especially the big ones. Turning 40? Oh no, you're over the hill now. Turning 50? Time to slow down. Turning 60? Well, you're not getting any younger. It's always delivered with a smirk or a chuckle, like it's harmless. But it's not harmless, because when a culture repeats something long enough, we stop questioning it, and we start shaping our lives around it. Think about it. What does the average 40-year-old start to believe? That ambition is a young person's game, that dreams are luxuries, not possibilities, that if you haven't made it by now, you probably never will. That change is irresponsible, that starting over is shameful, and slowly something dangerous happens. You stop listening to your instincts, you stop exploring, you stop dreaming, you start coasting. Not because you're lazy, not because you're weak, but because you've been programmed to believe this: if I'm aging, I must be fading. Let's pause here. Where did that idea even come from? Aging is the most natural, universal, inevitable thing in life, and yet we treat it like failure. We act like growing older means growing less. Less energy, less value, less relevance, less freedom. We use phrases like, "I'm too old for that." "That ship has sailed." "That's a young person's game." "I should have done it earlier." But here's a question for you. Too old for what exactly? Too old to change careers? Too old to fall in love? Too old to take a class? Too old to feel alive? Who told you that? And more importantly, why did you believe them? Let me tell you about Amanda. Amanda was 44 when she heard her daughter say something that broke her heart. They were sitting on the couch watching TV when a woman in her 50s came on screen. Stylish, confident, sharp. And her daughter said, "Wow, she's really cool for her age." Amanda froze, not because her daughter meant any harm, but because she realized that was exactly how she used to think. She realized that even though she still had energy, ideas, and curiosity, she had been quietly dimming herself for years, because somewhere deep down she believed, "I've had my moment." She hadn't said it out loud, but it was in the way she dressed, the way she declined invitations, the way she stopped dreaming, the way she stopped trying. Not because she couldn't, but because she thought she shouldn't. Here's the real damage of the lie. It doesn't make you stop. It makes you settle. You still go to work, still pay the bills, still show up, but you stop pursuing. You stop reaching for something bigger, deeper, more aligned. And do you know what's worse? People will praise you for it. They'll say, "You're so responsible. You've got a good routine. You've really settled into your life." As if that's always a compliment. But what if that settled feeling isn't peace? It's surrender? What if your life looks stable, but feels small? What if your comfort is costing you your aliveness? Let's go deeper. The culture doesn't just sell you this lie. It profits from it. Billions are spent convincing you that aging is a problem to fix. Creams, pills, procedures, programs, not to help you feel better, but to make you desperate to be who you were 20 years ago. That desperation sells. But it also stunts, because when your energy goes into resisting time, you forget how to embrace it. You forget to ask, what if aging isn't a problem? What if it's a privilege? What if this is the first time in my life I actually know who I am, and I finally have the chance to live that out? Let me tell you about Daryl. Daryl was 47, corporate consultant, steady job, well-respected, but he felt this quiet ache, like he was missing himself. One day, during a lunch break, he wandered into a community center. He heard jazz piano echoing from a side room, and suddenly he remembered something. He used to play. Not well, not professionally, but play for joy. That day, he signed up for Saturday lessons. 6 months later, he played at a small cafe, not because he was trying to make it, but because he missed being moved. He said, "Aging used to scare me, until I realized the problem wasn't my age. The problem was how small my life had become." So I want to challenge you, right here, right now. Ask yourself, what do I believe about aging? Where did I learn that? What if it's not true? What if I still have time? What if I still have permission? Because here's the thing. The lie about aging doesn't become true just because you keep living like it is. You get to change the story, not when the world gives you permission, but when you decide it's time. Let's end this part with something bold. Your best years are not behind you. They're not used up. They're not wasted. They're just waiting for you to stop performing your past and start claiming your future. Not the one culture wrote for you, not the one your younger self imagined, but the one your present self is finally strong enough to live. You don't see it on the calendar. There's no stamp on your driver's license, no memo in your inbox, no flashing sign that says, "Sorry, your time has expired." But somehow, you start to feel it. That quiet tug, that shrinking sense of possibility, that invisible message etched deep into your thoughts. It's too late for you now. Maybe it started when you got passed over for a promotion, and they gave it to someone younger. Or when you walked into a room full of 20-somethings and felt invisible. Or when a doctor casually said, "Well, at your age." Or when you caught yourself deleting a dream from your list, not because you didn't want it, but because you assumed it just wasn't realistic anymore. This is the second lie we're told about aging, and perhaps the cruelest, that your potential has an expiration date. And once you cross that invisible line, 40, 50, 60, you're expected to do one thing: settle. Let me be very clear. There is no expiration date on becoming more of yourself. But here's the problem. Most people don't question the idea. They just adjust to it. They don't mourn the dream. They file it away. They don't resist the role they've been put in. They shrink to fit it. And slowly, quietly, they become a smaller version of themselves, not because they're out of time, but because they've stopped believing they have time. Let me tell you about Jason. He was 46, recently divorced, had been a high school teacher for over 20 years, respected, stable, but hollow. He had a dream: to open a small art studio and teach adults how to paint, not for money, but for meaning. And every year he'd tell himself, maybe next year, when the timing's better. I should have done it when I was younger. Who wants to learn from someone my age anyway? But you know what he finally realized? That too late wasn't a fact. It was a feeling, and that feeling had been quietly dictating his life for a decade. So one afternoon, he looked up small retail spaces in his town. 3 months later, he opened the doors. And now he tells his students, this place isn't about painting. It's about permission. Because most of us gave up on something, not because it was impossible, but because we believed we'd missed the window. That's the poison of the expiration date mindset. It robs you not just of opportunity, but of hope. It tells you that falling in love after 50 is naive, that starting a new career in your 40s is risky, that writing your first book at 60 is delusional, that moving to a new city alone is irresponsible, that being excited about anything new after a certain age is childish. But none of those are truths. They're scripts. And just because you've lived them doesn't mean you have to keep living them. Let me ask you something deeply personal. When was the last time you let yourself want something without filtering it through your age? Without editing your desire to sound more appropriate? Without laughing it off before anyone else could? Because here's the truth. The biggest danger isn't dreaming too big. It's stopping before you even let the dream breathe. And that's what this mindset does. It makes you pre-reject your own possibility, not because it's truly gone, but because you've been told it should be. Do you know what makes this all worse? The comparison trap. You scroll, you watch, you read success stories, but they all seem to end with, and by 32, they had it all. As if life has a use-by date. As if the only stories worth telling are the ones that start early and finish fast. But let me remind you of something the culture won't. Vera Wang started designing at 40. Morgan Freeman got his breakout role at 52. Julia Child didn't learn to cook until her late 30s. Grandma Moses started painting at 78. Harlan Sanders, yes, Colonel Sanders, franchised his chicken business at 62. These aren't exceptions, they're reminders that life unfolds on your timeline, not society's, and it's never too late to make something sacred out of the time you still have. Let me tell you about Nadine. She was 55, retired early due to health reasons, widowed, lonely. For a while she just floated. She watched her friends go on vacations, post family photos, live what seemed like vibrant second acts, and she felt forgotten. Until one day, she joined a local creative writing class, just for fun. She ended up writing a story about grief, then another about resilience, then another. Her instructor encouraged her to compile them. She did. That book now sits in libraries in her state. Not a bestseller, but something more important. Proof that your voice doesn't expire when the world stops listening. It just waits for you to reclaim it. So here's the question. What dream are you sitting on? Not because it's dead, but because you believed you were. That book? That move? That letter? That love? That version of yourself who's still daring enough to want more? She's not gone. He's not foolish. They're just buried under the weight of timelines that were never yours to begin with. Let me end this part with one truth, the kind that hits deep. The only thing worse than failing at something late in life is never starting because you assumed it was too late. You are not expired. You are experienced. You are not irrelevant. You are ripening. You are not too late. You are right on time for whatever matters next. Let's turn the lens around. We've talked about the lie. We've named the trap. We've exposed the invisible expiration date you were never meant to follow. But now, let's talk about the truth. Because here's what the culture forgets to tell you. Aging isn't a decline. It's a refinement. And it comes with gifts youth can't even touch. There's a clarity that hits in your 40s and 50s that you can't fake in your 20s. In your 20s, you chase approval. In your 30s, you chase stability. But in your 40s, you start chasing truth. Not the kind that looks good, the kind that feels real. You don't want loud anymore. You want honest. You don't crave more stuff. You crave peace. You don't need to be impressive. You just want to be free. That is the real beginning of wisdom. And it's one of the most underrated gifts of aging. You start hearing your own voice again. And this time you listen. Let me tell you about Sarah. She was 49, a VP of operations at a tech company. Respected, efficient, exhausted. On paper, she was unstoppable. In her body, she was breaking down. She told me, "I spent my 30s building a life I thought I was supposed to want, and my 40s realizing I don't want it at all." It took her almost a year to admit the truth. She didn't want the meetings, the title, the house that echoed at night. She wanted meaning. She wanted mornings that didn't feel like a war. She wanted to come home to herself. And here's what blew her mind. The moment she said it out loud, the fear melted, and the clarity came. She left her role, downsized, took 6 months off, started a community garden initiative in her city, became a mentor for other mid-career women. She said, "It took me 49 years to find my own permission slip, but now that I have it, I'm never handing it back." This is what I want you to hear. Aging doesn't strip your potential. It strips your performance. And what's left is raw, is real, is you. You stop pretending to be easygoing when you're not. You stop chasing people who don't care. You stop filling rooms you don't belong in. You stop over-apologizing for your preferences, your pace, your peace. You become more deliberate. You become dangerous to every lie that once controlled you, not because you're harder, but because you're finally rooted. And let's talk about energy. Everyone says, you won't have the same energy you had in your 20s. True, but maybe that's a gift. Because now, you stop wasting it on people who drain you. You stop sprinting toward goals that don't fulfill you. You stop confusing busy with valuable. You consume. You focus. You channel. And that kind of energy is quieter, more powerful, and far more lasting. Let me share a moment I'll never forget. A man named Charles, 61 years old, sat across from me after a community talk. He said, "I used to think aging meant becoming less relevant, but I've never felt more awake, more grounded, more me than I do now. The difference is, now I don't need a crowd to clap for me. I just need to look in the mirror and know I'm not lying to myself anymore." That is the sacred gift of growing older. You no longer chase applause. You chase alignment. So let me ask you something. What if your best self isn't behind you, but waiting for you in the unfiltered version of your life? The one where you don't explain yourself to people who don't listen. You don't play small to keep others comfortable. You don't stay just because it's safe. The one where you walk into rooms with full presence, not because you're the youngest, not because you're the flashiest, but because you finally know what you're about. That's what midlife gives you. Not the rush of arrival, but the richness of awareness. And here's another truth. You have depth now. You've grieved. You've loved. You've lost. You've rebuilt. You've watched things end, and still gotten up the next morning. And that kind of depth can't be taught. It can only be earned. So while the world keeps shouting about youth, you get to stand in your wisdom, quietly, fiercely, without apology. Let's talk about relationships. In youth, you learn attraction. In midlife, you learn intimacy. You stop being impressed by looks and start being drawn to depth. You stop pretending you're fine when you're not. You stop performing for connection and start demanding it. You speak your needs. You create boundaries. You build fewer but deeper bonds. And that's real love. You also become a better friend, to others and to yourself. You notice who you can be unfiltered around. You notice who asks how you're really doing, and stays for the answer. You notice your own triggers, and instead of lashing out, you breathe. That kind of self-awareness isn't weakness. It's mastery, and it only comes when you've lived long enough to see your patterns and choose differently. Let me say this clearly. You are not in decline. You are in refinement. You are not losing time. You are reclaiming it. You are not irrelevant. You are irreplaceable, because your story, your voice, your presence carries weight. So let's rewrite the narrative right here, right now. Aging is not a curse. It's a call. Midlife is not a plateau. It's a proving ground. Your 40s and 50s are not the end of vibrancy. They're the beginning of your most authentic fire. You've shed illusions. You've seen through the noise. And now you're standing at the edge of your truth. The only question is, will you trust it enough to build something new? Here's the beautiful, liberating truth that no one told you growing up. You don't owe your past self a lifetime contract. Read that again. You're allowed to outgrow who you used to be. You're allowed to rewrite your story. Not because the old one was wrong, but because you're not standing in that version anymore. So many people in their 40s and 50s feel stuck. Not because they don't know what they want now, but because they feel guilty for changing. They say things like, "But I've invested so much time in this path. I already chose this career, this marriage, this life. What will people think if I pivot now? I should be grateful. Others have less. Who am I to start over at this age?" But all of those thoughts come from the same place. The fear that changing your story means betraying your past. And that's the lie. Because your past self, they got you here. They did the best they could. They made choices with the information, strength, and awareness they had. But now, you have more. More experience, more clarity, more inner honesty. And it would be a tragedy to let loyalty to an outdated identity rob you of the life you're meant to live now. Let me tell you about Renee. She spent 22 years as a stay-at-home mom. Her kids were her world. Her home was always filled with life. But once her youngest went to college, the silence was deafening. She didn't recognize herself anymore. And at first, she felt selfish even thinking about starting something new. She said, "Who am I to want more when I've had so much?" But something inside her, something she had buried for decades, began to stir. A love for storytelling, a quiet ache to write, not for fame, not for followers, just for the joy of saying something real. At 51, she started a blog. By 53, her essays were being shared by parenting groups and women's wellness websites across the country. And by 55, she published her first book, A Life Between the Lines. She said, "I didn't write because I had something to prove. I wrote because I finally had something to say, to myself." That's what midlife gives you. Not just the freedom to rewrite the story, but the wisdom to write it better. But rewriting isn't always easy. It requires courage, not the loud kind, but the quiet kind. The kind that says, "Yes, I was that, and now I'm this. Yes, I believed that, and now I believe something deeper. Yes, that chapter mattered, and I'm still allowed to turn the page." And the moment you do, you reclaim the pen. No longer waiting for someone else to give you permission. No longer living on autopilot because it's what people expect. No longer shrinking just to fit the outline of a life that no longer inspires you. But here's what makes this process sacred. The story you write now isn't about reinvention. It's about reconnection. You're not becoming a stranger to yourself. You're returning to the parts of you that always existed. You just didn't have the freedom, the time, or the clarity to name them yet. Let me ask you this. When was the last time you asked yourself, "What do I want?" Not as a parent, partner, professional, but as a human being who still has breath in their lungs and dreams in their heart. If that question feels impossible, it's not because you're too old to dream. It's because you've spent decades deferring to everyone else's needs. But now is the time to come back to yourself, not in rebellion, but in restoration. Let me tell you about David. He was 58, engineer, loved his work, for a while. But lately he felt like a machine, productive, efficient, but empty. He remembered how, as a teenager, he used to play guitar for hours, not to be good, but because it made him feel. One day, on a whim, he picked up a used guitar from a thrift store. He didn't tell anyone. Every night, after dinner, he'd sit in his garage and just play. After 6 months, his daughter walked in, smiled, and said, "You look more alive now than I've seen in years." He didn't quit his job, didn't run off to start a band. He just started saying yes to the version of himself that still wanted to feel something. This is what writing a new story looks like. Not always dramatic, not always public. Sometimes It's as simple as choosing yourself again. Choosing presence over performance, joy over duty, curiosity over caution. And you don't need anyone's permission to do it. So here's what I want you to know. You don't need a perfect plan. You just need a pause to ask yourself what still matters. And then you begin. Messy, honest, wholehearted. Because the new story won't come from outside you. It will rise from the inside, from the parts of you that have been waiting patiently while you were too busy surviving. Let me end this part with this. Midlife is not a crisis. It's an awakening. It's the moment you realize you don't have to keep being the person other people remember. You get to become the person you've quietly longed to be. And if there's one thing that aging gives you permission to do, it's to finally mean what you say, to live aligned with what actually matters, to write a story where peace is success, and authenticity is the goal. Let's ask the question most people are too afraid to ask. What if this isn't the end? What if this is the beginning of your real life? Not the one you built to impress, not the one you carried out of obligation, not the one you settled into because it was expected, but the one that fits like breath, the one that wakes you up, gently but fully, the one that finally feels like home. Most people think reinvention looks loud, big moves, new cities, radical change. But that's not what most beginnings look like. Do you know what they actually feel like? A quiet clarity you can't shake, a tiny no to something that used to define you, a strange new yes to something that lights you up, a restless feeling at 2 a.m. that whispers, "You were made for more than this." Beginnings are subtle, almost too gentle to notice, until one day, you wake up and realize you've been returning to yourself all along. Let me tell you about Liam. At 42, he looked on track. Career, marriage, 2 kids, nice house. But every day, he felt like he was starring in a movie someone else wrote. One day, he walked into a bookstore and stumbled on a journal with a single quote on the cover. "Live the story only you can write." It hit him like a punch to the chest. He bought the journal, took it home, and that night, for the first time in over a decade, he wrote down something raw. "I don't know who I am without the expectations, but I want to find out." That was the beginning, not of chaos, not of recklessness, but of remembering. Maybe that's where you are too. You don't hate your life, but you don't love it either. You're going through the motions, fulfilling the roles, keeping the machine running. But somewhere deep underneath the obligations, you feel it, the ache for aliveness. And it's not silly, it's not immature, it's not too late, it's sacred. That ache is not a weakness, it's a calling. You see, no one tells you this, but longing is a sign of life, and you're still here. So let me ask you, really ask you, what if your best years haven't passed? What if they've just been waiting for you to claim them? Waiting for you to say, "Enough with the performance. I'm done outsourcing my worth. I don't want a perfect life. I want a real one." Waiting for you to write a new beginning that doesn't erase your past, but redeems it. Let's get honest. You will never be 25 again. You will never have the same skin, the same knees, the same metabolism. But you know what you have now? You have depth. You have discernment. You have dignity. And most of all, you have choice. The choice to stop surviving. The choice to stop sleepwalking. The choice to wake up, even if it's later than you thought it would be. Because the truth is, it's not too late. It's on time. Let me give you this image. You're standing at the edge of a forest. Behind you, a path paved with everything that made you who you are. Some of it beautiful, some of it brutal, all of it real. But ahead of you, a path that's never been walked. No map, no guide, just you, your instincts, and the light that lives inside you now. Will you take the first step, even if it's shaky, Even if you're scared, even if no one claps? You've listened to this far, and that says something. It says you're ready, not for something perfect, but for something honest. So here's your invitation. Write the chapter that your younger self didn't believe was possible. Live the decade that generations before you didn't even imagine. Be the first in your circle to say, I'm not done. I'm just beginning. And if you're wondering where to start, you just did. This video isn't the end of your scrolling. It's the start of your remembering. If this spoke to you, if something deep inside whispered, yes, that's me, then don't just click away. Subscribe to this channel, not because I need the numbers, but because you need a reminder. A reminder that you're not the only one feeling this. A reminder that you're not too late. A reminder that your story still matters. Here, we're building a community of midlife awakenings, of people who are done with surface, done with fear, done with silence. People who are rewriting their lives with more truth, more depth, more meaning. If that sounds like you, join us, because the lie may be loud, but together our truth can be louder. And the next time someone tells you, well, at your age, you'll smile and say, exactly. That's why I'm just getting started.